Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time,
And today we are really opening up the hood on what might be the most complex, the most influential, and definitely the most frustrating system we ever have to deal with.
which is the human mind itself.
Exactly. Our own brains.
And to do that, we are tackling a book that I think qualifies as a modern heavy-A champion. We're diving into Thinking Fast and Slow by the late Daniel Kahneman.
It's a monster of a book.
It is. I have to be honest, this book has been staring at me from my shelf for years. It's that brick of a book that everyone buys to signal they're smart. You know, it's usually sitting right next to a biography of Steve Jobs or something.
Right. It's become a bit of a cultural artifact.
But we are not here to treat this as a self-help guide. This isn't a list of 10 productivity hacks to beat your biases. That's not what this deep dive is about, is it?
Absolutely not. And I'm so glad you're making that distinction right at the top. This is not about how to master your mind or optimize your workflow to get a promotion.
Okay, good.
We are looking at this text as a structural analysis. It's about cognitive architecture. The core systemic question we're really trying to get at today is this. Why does human judgment consistently, and I mean predictably, depart from rational models?
Even when the stakes are incredibly high.
Especially when the stakes are high. Why do we make these mistakes over and over again?
That is the million-dollar question. I mean, you look at how we design the world, our financial markets, our social media algorithms, our public policy. It feels like we're building it all on the assumption that human beings are these perfectly rational actors. We build entire economic systems on this idea that people make logical choices to maximize their own benefits. But Kahneman, he seems to be throwing a giant wrench in that whole engine.
He's not just throwing a wrench in it, he's taking the engine apart piece by piece and showing us that we built it for a driver who doesn't even exist.
A fictional character.
A fictional character called the econ. And this matters now more than ever because our modern decision-making systems, they operate at speeds and scales that privilege intuition. They privilege that gut reaction over slow, deliberate reflection.
So we've built a high-speed world designed for a super-rational computer, but it's populated by
us.
By messy, emotional, shortcut-taking humans. So, okay, let's unpack the source here. We're talking about the work of Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize in economics, which is fascinating because he's a psychologist.
Right, and he's the first person to tell you he never took a single economics class in his life. But you really cannot tell this story, you can't understand this work, without talking about his collaborator, Amos Tversky.
The other half of the equation, I was reading about their relationship, and it sounded less like two academics in tweed jackets writing papers and more like, I don't know, a Lennon and McCartney situation.
That is a perfect analogy. Their collaboration was legendary. It was this intense, ongoing conversation that basically briefed a new scientific discipline.
Behavioral economics.
Behavioral economics? Kahneman describes Amos Tversky as just this brilliant, sharp, analytical theorist. He was the one who could see the mathematical structure of things, the logic underneath. Kahneman was more the intuitive psychologist, the one rooted in perception, who just noticed the quirks of how we see the world.
And their process was just talking.
And laughing, mostly laughing. People who had offices near them at the university would complain about the noise because they were constantly cracking up. They would invent these clever scenarios, these little puzzles to try and trick each other.
So they were their own first test subjects.
They were. And they realized something profound. Even as world-class experts in statistics, their own intuitions about statistics were deeply flawed.
That's actually very comforting to hear.
It is, because in the 1970s, the dominant dogma in social science was that people are, by and large, rational. And if they make a mistake in judgment, it's treated as an anomaly. It's usually blamed on some powerful emotion, fear, love, hate.
So the idea was that the logical software in our brain works fine, but sometimes an emotion virus comes along and crashes the program.
Exactly. Kahneman and Tversky just flipped the entire table over. They proposed that the errors aren't bugs in the software caused by emotion. The errors are features of the cognitive design itself.
Hold on. You're saying that being wrong isn't a malfunction, it's the factory setting.
In many, many specific and predictable contexts, yes. The machinery of our cognition produces systematic errors as a natural byproduct of its incredible efficiency.
Wow.
And, Kahneman states his goal for the book quite modestly in the introduction. He says he wants to enrich the vocabulary of water cooler gossip.
I love that line. It sounds so humble. He's not saying, I want to reprogram humanity or I want to save the global economy. He's just saying, I want you to gossip better.
But think about the systemic value of that for a second. It is so much easier to identify the mistakes of others than it is to recognize our own.
Oh, for sure.
We are just terrible at self-diagnosis in the moment. When you're angry or overconfident, you don't feel biased. You feel correct. You feel righteous.
You feel like you're seeing things clearly for the first time.
Precisely. But if we have a shared, precise language, if you and I can look at a decision a politician made and say, oh, that's a classic case of anchoring, or they're falling for the conjunction fallacy, then we can diagnose systemic errors in judgment. It's like a physician diagnosing a disease. You need the right words.
So to get to that diagnosis, we have to understand the anatomy first. And the central thesis of the book is that our thinking isn't one single process. It's an interaction between two very different systems.
Correct. He calls them, very creatively, System 1 and System 2.
I have to say, for a Nobel Prize winner, System 1 and System 2 are not the catchiest names in the world.
They're very utilitarian, but they work. They stick in your head. So think of System 1 as the hero and very often the villain of our mental life. It's fast. It's automatic, it's associative, it's completely involuntary. It's the part of you that detects hostility in a voice instantly, before you even process the words.
It's what lets you read the words on a billboard without trying to.
Exactly. If I say salt and lawn, your mind screams pepper before you can stop it. That's System 1.
It's the autopilot.
It's more than an autopilot. It's the reality generator. It's constantly building the model of the world that you experience. And the most critical feature of System 1, the one you have to remember, is that you cannot turn it off.
It's always on.
It is always running, always generating suggestions, feelings, and intuitions. You cannot not understand a simple sentence in your native language. The input just becomes the meaning.
Okay, so if System 1 is this fast, automatic, always-on reality generator, what on earth is System 2?
System 2 is the lazy controller. It's slow, it's effortful, it's logical and calculating. When you think of yourself, you know, the conscious eye that mulls over a problem, that decides what to order from a menu, that chooses to buy a house, you are identifying the System 2.
But you called it lazy. That feels a little personal.
It is profoundly lazy. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it in a physiological, biological sense.
Yeah.
System 2 runs on a very limited budget of attention and effort.
It actually burns glucose.
It literally burns glucose. Your brain is an energy conservation machine, evolved over millennia to be as efficient as possible. If System 1 offers up a plausible-sounding answer, System 2 will almost always just rubber stamp it and move on to save energy.
Can we actually prove that?
Yeah.
Or is this just a useful metaphor?
Oh, it's absolutely measurable. Kahneman describes these fantastic experiments like the add 1 or add 3 tasks. We can try a simple version. If I give you 4 digits, say 5, 2, 9, 4, and ask you to add 3 to each digit to the beat of a metronome.
Okay, 8, 5, 12, 7.
Did you feel that, the shift in your attention?
Yeah, I stopped looking at you. I had to sort of look up at the ceiling. I felt a tiny bit of mental strain.
That is the feeling of System 2 kicking into gear. And if we were measuring your eyes right now, your pupils would have dilated. Yes, pupil dilation is a direct physical measure of mental effort. It's like the RPM gauge on your car's engine. When the task gets too hard, or conversely, when you just give up and say, I'm done, your pupils shrink instantly. System 2 disengages.
So most of the time, when we think we are thinking, we aren't actually revving that engine. We're just coasting.
We are coasting on the suggestions of System 1. We only call in the heavy machinery of System 2 when we absolutely have to, when something surprising happens, or when we consciously decide to focus.
This leads us directly to the first major insight from the book, which Kahneman gives this great acronym, WYSIATI.
WYSIATI. What you see is all there is.
And this concept really messed with me, because on the surface it sounds obvious. Of course, we only know what we know. But he means something much more aggressive than that, doesn't he?
He does. He means that System 1's primary job is to construct the most coherent, plausible story possible from the information it currently has activated. It does not account for information it doesn't have.
It doesn't even have a little placeholder in the file for unknown data.
Exactly. It doesn't know what it doesn't know. And more importantly, it doesn't care that it doesn't know.
Give me an example of that.
Okay. If I tell you, Mindik is intelligent and strong, and then I ask you, is she a good leader? What does your gut say?
Yes, of course.
System 1 immediately says yes. It builds a coherent, positive picture of a strong leader. It doesn't wait. It doesn't pause to ask, hold on, is she also corrupt? Is she cruel? Do we have enough information to make this judgment?
No. because that information wasn't presented. So my brain just takes the two data points, draws a straight line, closes the file, and says, case closed, she's a great leader.
Precisely. And this is the most critical and terrifying implication of WYSIAD. The confidence you feel in a judgment is determined by the coherence of the story you can tell, not by the quality or the quantity of the evidence supporting it.
Wow. A simple, compelling story with terrible data will feel more true than a complex, messy story with excellent data.
Every single time. This explains so much about, well, everything. Internet discourse, political sound bites, conspiracy theories. We don't want evidence. We want the story to click.
We want that feeling of cognitive ease.
That's the one. And it explains why we jump to conclusions so readily. To unbelieve something, to actively doubt, requires system two. It requires mental work to hold an idea in your head and say, this might be false. System one is inherently gullible. System two is skeptical, but it's also tired and lazy. And since system two is lazy, belief is the default. We are wired to believe.
So our brains are belief machines that run on stories. Now, I want to talk about the next piece of the architecture, which is priming, because this is where the book gets a little controversial, especially in the year since it was published. We should probably tread carefully here.
Yes, this is a crucial area, and it's important to discuss the nuance.
So the basic idea of what he calls the associative machine is that ideas evoke other ideas in this big web. If I say beach, you might think sun, sand, water.
Right. And if I say bananas, and then a few minutes later I show you the word fragment VT, you're more likely to fill it in as vomit if I had first paired banana with the story about food poisoning. The concepts become linked.
It's a cascading network.
Yeah.
And Kahneman cites some really famous, almost spectacular studies in the book. The Florida effect is the big one.
Right. The now infamous Florida effect study. This was an experiment where researchers had young college students unscramble sentences that contained words associated with the elderly words like Florida, bald, gray, winkle.
But not the word old itself.
No, never the word old. It was all indirect. Then afterward, the students were told the experiment was over and they walked down the hall to the next one. But the real experiment was measuring their walking speed down that hall. And in that original study, the students who had been primed with elderly words walked significantly slower than the control group.
The claim being that just thinking about old makes you act old. It's an ideomotor effect.
That was the claim, yes.
But, and this is the big but, this study has run into some problems since the book came out, hasn't it?
It has. This is a central exhibit in what's known as the replication crisis in psychology and other social sciences. Other labs tried to run the Florida experiment again, following the same procedure, and many of them couldn't replicate the results. Or if they found an effect, it was much, much smaller.
So does that invalidate the whole book? Does that mean Kahneman was wrong and priming isn't real?
No, and that's the key distinction. It doesn't mean priming is fake. The fundamental mechanism that one thought can trigger associated thoughts, feelings, and even physical responses, that's robust.
Okay.
If you're hungry and you see a picture of a juicy burger, your mouth might water and you might be more likely to order food. That is priming. It's real. But the specific, really dramatic, almost magical sounding examples, like the walking speed or another famous one about feeling powerful makes you draw a bigger E on your forehead, those have turned out to be less reliable than we thought back in 2011.
I really appreciate that distinction. It feels important for our listeners to understand that science is a process, not a holy text. Even Nobel laureates can cite studies that later turn out to be shaky or just statistical noise.
Exactly. And to his great credit, Kahneman himself has been very open and graceful about this, publicly acknowledging the replication issues. But the core insight of System 1 remains solid. We are constantly being influenced by our environment in ways that we are not conscious of.
Okay, let's move to something that feels a lot harder to debunk because it's not about psychology, it's just about math. The law of small numbers.
This is a classic case of our pattern-seeking brains going into overdrive where no pattern actually exists.
Kahneman brings up this amazing real-world example, a study of kidney cancer rates across counties in the United States. And the data showed that the counties with the absolute lowest incidence of kidney cancer were mostly rural, sparsely populated, and tended to be in Republican-leaning states.
Okay, so engage your System 1 right now. Give me a causal story. Why are those rural counties so healthy?
Easy. It's obvious. Fresh air, no pollution from the cities. They eat clean, farm-fresh food. They're not stressed out. Maybe they do more hard physical labor.
Yeah.
It's a healthier lifestyle. It makes perfect sense.
It makes a very compelling, coherent story. Now here's the twist. The study also looked at the counties with the highest incidence of kidney cancer.
Okay.
And guess what?
Ah,
They were also mostly rural, sparsely populated, and located in Republican-leaning states.
wait. What? So
Yeah.
now the clean air gives them cancer.
If you let System 1 drive, yes, you'd immediately invent a new story. You'd say, oh, it's the poverty, it's the lack of access to good hospitals, it's the high-fat diet and smoking.
But it can't be both. Those two stories directly contradict each other.
It's neither.
All right.
The real answer has nothing to do with lifestyle or politics. It's just statistics. These are sparsely populated counties. That means they have very small sample sizes. If a county only has, say, 300 people, and by pure chance nobody gets kidney cancer this year, their rate is 0, the lowest in the country. If next year just 2 people get it, their rate skyrockets, and suddenly they're among the highest in the country.
So we are just looking at noise.
Yeah.
We're looking at random statistical fluctuations.
We are looking at luck. But System 1 cannot process the concept of random. It is a cause-seeking machine. So we spend millions of dollars and write countless news articles trying to explain why County A is a health paradise and County B is a cancer cluster, when the real boring answer is just, they're small.
That is genuinely terrifying for policymaking. Imagine how many decisions are made based on a single bad year or a good year at a school or a company that was just a statistical coin flip.
It happens constantly in education reform, in investment banking, in sports management. We fire the coach because of a losing streak that was statistically inevitable given the small number of games in a season. We see patterns in randomness.
This connects directly to another one of the big biases, anchoring. This is one that I feel like I catch myself doing all the time.
Anchoring is one of the most robust and powerful effects in all of psychology. It's what happens when you're exposed to a number, and that number then pulls any subsequent estimate you make toward it, even if the number is completely arbitrary and irrelevant.
The Gandhi example from the book is the one that really stuck with me.
Let's do it. So if I ask you a question, was Gandhi older or younger than 144 when he died?
Well, obviously younger. He wasn't a wizard. That's a ridiculous number.
It is a ridiculous number. But if I then ask you, okay, so how old was he when he died? Your estimate will be significantly higher than if I had started with a different anchor.
Higher than if you'd ask, was he older or younger than 35?
Exactly. Even though the number 144 is transparently absurd, it acts as an anchor in your mind. System 1 latches onto it, it primes associations of a very, very old age, and that drags your final estimate up. It's a process of adjustment. You start at 144 and you adjust downwards, but you stop adjusting too early because it takes System 2 effort to keep going.
And this isn't just a fun party trick. This happens in courtrooms. This is where the crisis in perception theme really hits home for me.
There was a truly disturbing experiment conducted with experienced German judges. These are legal professionals who pride themselves on being impartial and rational. They were given a case file for a shoplifter and then asked to roll a pair of dice before they recommended a sentence.
Dice. Like
Yes.
from a board game?
Yes. But the dice were loaded. They would only ever land on a 3 or a 9. The judges rolled the dice, saw the number, were asked if the sentence should be higher or lower than that number in months, and then they gave their actual recommended sentence.
Please don't tell me the dice mattered.
The judges who rolled a 9 gave sentences that were, on average, 50% longer than the sentences given by the judges who rolled a 3.
That is horrifying. A completely random roll of the dice literally determined how much of someone's life was spent in prison.
And here's the kicker. If you ask those judges why they gave the sentence they did, they would give you a passionate, perfectly reasoned legal argument. They'd say, well, the defendant showed no remorse, or this was a particularly severe case of theft. They would believe their own story.
Their System 2 was just acting as a press secretary for System 1.
It rationalizes what System 1 has already been nudged to do. The anchor, the number 9, primed them to think in harsher terms, and their rational mind just wrote the legal proof to justify it.
It really makes you wonder how much of our everyday reasoning is just our brain acting like a lawyer, defending a feeling we had 5 seconds ago for reasons we can't even access.
I would argue, based on this work, most of it.
Okay, let's keep going. Let's unpack the availability heuristic. This one feels like it drives so much of our modern media consumption and our political fears.
Availability is another classic mental shortcut. It's a substitution. We're faced with a hard statistical question like, how frequent is this particular event in the world? Answering that properly requires data, spreadsheets, research. It's a System 2 task.
It's hard work.
So System 1 substitutes an easier question. How easily can I remember an example of this happening?
So if an example springs to mind instantly, I just assume the event happens all the time.
Correct. And what makes things memorable? What makes them available to a human brain? Drama, blood,
Huh.
recency, vivid imagery, emotional intensity.
So shark attacks.
Shark attacks are the perfect example. They are terrifying, they are visual, they are dramatic. You see them on the news every summer, so we develop an inflated sense of their frequency.
And we completely underestimate something like, say, death from asthma.
Because dying of asthma is a silent, private, and frankly boring event from a media perspective. It doesn't make the evening news, so examples don't come to mind easily. We misjudge the risk landscape of the entire world based on what the media chooses to show us.
There's a much more domestic example in the book that made me laugh, mostly because I am so guilty of it. Spouses overestimating their personal contribution to housework.
Ah, yes, the chapter that probably led to a few arguments in households that read the book.
I swear I had this exact fight last Tuesday. I was completely convinced that I did 90% of the kitchen cleanup.
And I'm sure your partner felt that they also did 90% of it.
Probably. And I thought I was being rational.
It's not necessarily narcissism, although that can play a role. It's fundamentally a bias of availability. You are present for 100% of your own labor. You remember the effort. You feel the fatigue of taking out the trash because you were there doing it. You do not have the corresponding vivid memory of your partner doing it last week while you were at work.
So my personal database of effort is completely skewed because I'm the only one collecting the data on myself.
Exactly. When researchers ask members of a couple to independently estimate their percentage contribution to various household chores, the sum almost always exceeds 100%. We are all the heroes of our own story because our own efforts are so much more available to our memory.
I will try to remember that next time I'm arguing about the dishes. Honey, it's just the availability heuristic. I'm sure that will go over really well.
I would not recommend that as a de-escalation tactic.
Noted. Okay, one more big insight from this core analysis before we get to the systems mapping. The Linda problem. This is the one that demonstrates the conjunction fallacy.
This is the one that breaks people's brains. It drives statisticians crazy because it shows how easily a good story can overpower basic logic.
Lay it out for us. What is the Linda problem?
Okay, so participants in the experiment are given a short personality sketch. It reads, Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice and also participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations.
Okay, I have a clear picture of Linda. She's an activist type, probably shops at a food co-op.
Right. System 1 builds a rich stereotype instantly. Then you are asked to rank several possibilities by how probable they are. And two of the options are A, Linda is a bank teller, and B, Linda is a bank teller who is active in the feminist movement.
My gut, my system 1, screams B. Absolutely B, because bank teller on its own sounds so boring and conventional. It doesn't fit the description at all. But feminist bank teller, that clicks. That resolves the tension in the story.
And that is precisely why 85% of people choose B, including doctoral students in statistics programs who should know better. But just look at it with system 2 for a moment.
Okay, I'm trying.
Think about it in terms of a Venn diagram. The category bank teller who is active in the feminist movement is a subset of the category bank teller.
Right, because every single feminist bank teller is a bank teller. You can't be in the second group without also being in the first.
Exactly. Imagine a huge circle of all the bank tellers in the world. Inside that circle, there's a much smaller circle of feminist bank tellers. It is a logical, statistical impossibility for the smaller circle, B, to be more probable than the larger circle, A. Adding a detail feminist can only ever decrease the probability, never increase it.
But B feels like such a better story.
And there it is again. That's the battle. Logic versus coherence. System 1 doesn't do logic. It does coherence. It does what makes the best story. Linda is a bank teller, creates a conflict with the description. It's an incoherent story. Linda is a feminist bank teller, resolves that conflict. It's a better story, so we judge it to be more probable, even when it violates the fundamental laws of logic.
Okay, so we've laid out the basic machinery. We have this fast, storytelling, error-prone System 1 running the show, and we have a slow, lazy, but logical System 2 that is supposed to be in charge but often just rubber stamps whatever System 1 suggests.
That's the core architecture.
Now, let's zoom out and map this onto the bigger picture of how our society is structured. The book draws this incredibly sharp line between two types of beings. econs and humans.
This is the central battlefield where Kahneman and Tversky waged their war against classical economics. For decades, economic theory was built on the foundation of the econ.
The econ. It sounds like a character from a bad sci-fi movie.
It might as well be. The econ is a fictional character. It's the perfectly rational agent. The econ is always consistent, always logical, purely self-interested. The econ's preferences don't get scrambled just because you worded the same question in a slightly different way.
So if an econ likes apples more than oranges on Monday, they still like apples more than oranges on Tuesday, period.
Period. The econ is a reliable, predictable machine. And then there's the human.
And the human is us.
The human is us, ruled by System 1. The human is wildly inconsistent. The human hates losing $1 far more than they enjoy gaining $1. The human's decision about retirement savings can be influenced by whether it's a sunny or a cloudy day. The human buys an expensive car because they like the visceral feeling of the engine's roar, not because they did a spreadsheet on its resale value.
And one of the most damning sections in the book for the idea of the econ is where Kahneman talks about what he calls the illusion of validity. He uses the example of analyzing the skill of stock pickers. This really attacks that core idea that financial markets are efficient and that the experts know what they're doing.
This was a pivotal moment in his career. He got access to the records of a high-end investment firm. He looked at the performance of their wealth advisors over 8 consecutive years. He just wanted to ask a simple question. Do the advisors who do well in one year also tend to do well in the next? Is skill persistent?
In a rational world, a world run by econs with genuine skill, the good traders should stay good and the bad ones should stay bad, right?
Yeah.
There should be a strong correlation.
Correct. Consistency is the hallmark of skill. If you're a great chess player, you win most of your matches year after year. So Kahneman ran the correlations on these highly paid financial experts. He found that the year-to-year correlation of their performance was effectively zero.
Zero. Not just low, but zero. So it was random.
It was almost perfectly random. The trader who was hailed as a genius and got a $1 million bonus in 2008 was just as likely to be at the bottom of the pack in 2009 as they were to be at the top again. It was, for all intents and purposes, luck.
But I'm sure they didn't believe it was luck.
Of course not. When Kahneman presented his findings to the executives of the firm, they just brushed it off. They couldn't accept it. Because they felt the stress, they did the hours of research. They had a compelling story for every single trade they made.
I bought Apple because I foresaw the success of the iPhone. I sold Ford because I knew the recall was coming.
Exactly. This is the illusion of validity. When we have a coherent story in our heads, and that story is accompanied by a strong feeling of confidence, we assume we have skill. We mistake the feeling of cognitive ease for genuine insight.
There's that perfect little anecdote about the executive buying Ford stock.
Yes, a perfect example of what he calls the effect heuristic. It's another substitution. The chief investment officer of a firm buys millions of dollars of Ford stock. When Kahneman asked him why he made this huge financial decision, the guy says, "Boy, do they know how to make a car. I just went to the auto show and I loved them."
He substituted the incredibly difficult question. Based on all available financial data, is Ford stock currently underpriced by the market?
A very hard System 2 question.
With the incredibly easy question, do I like Ford cars?
An easy System 1 question based on feeling. And he didn't even notice he'd done it. That's the real danger. His System 2 believed it had made a sophisticated financial decision, when in reality his System 1 had just made an emotional one based on shiny objects.
We also have to talk about the invisible gorilla experiment. This fits so perfectly with our channel's whole theme of a crisis in perception. It shows we're not just biased, we're literally blind.
This is the famous study by Christopher Chabris and Daniel Simons. It's so simple and so profound. You show a group of people a video of 2 teams, one in white shirts and one in black shirts, passing basketballs around, and you give them a specific task that demands focus.
A System 2 task.
Exactly. You tell them your job is to count the exact number of passes made by the team in white. So people are leaning in, they're focused, they're counting 14, 15, 16.
You're using up that limited budget of attention.
Yeah. And in the middle of the video, a person in a full-body gorilla suit walks right into the middle of the game, turns at the camera, thumps their chests, and then slowly walks off. The gorilla is on screen for a full 9 seconds.
What happens?
And half the viewers don't see it.
They don't see the gorilla at all.
They will swear on a stack of Bibles that there was no gorilla. But the most profound part of the experiment is not just that they miss it, it's what happens when you show them the video again. They are shocked. They are stunned. They often accuse the researcher of switching the tape on them.
Because it's so obvious once you're not counting passes.
It's impossible to miss. And the lesson is that we are blind to the obvious, and we are also blind to our own blindness. We walk through the world with this powerful assumption that we are perceiving reality as it truly is. We are not. We are perceiving a sliver of reality that our attention constructs for us.
And this blindness, it extends even to experts and their theories. Kahneman has this great phrase for it, theory-induced blindness.
This is what explains how a flawed model, like the rational econ, could survive for so long in economics. Once you have a powerful theory, it acts like a lens. You start to see the world through that lens, and any data that contradicts the theory, you either don't see it or you explain it away as an anomaly.
You fit the facts to the theory, not the other way around.
Precisely. Bernoulli's utility theory, which was the foundation of rational choice theory, stood for nearly 300 years despite having some obvious flaws in how it described actual human behavior.
Let's dig into that for a second. Because Bernoulli's utility theory sounds incredibly dry, but it was the basis for how we thought about risk and money for centuries.
Right. So very simply, Bernoulli said that the utility or the happiness you get from money depends on the final state of your wealth. So if I offer you a gamble that results in you having a net worth of $1 million, you should be equally happy about that outcome, regardless of how you got there.
That sounds reasonable enough. $1 million is $1 million.
Is it? Let's use Kahneman's example. Imagine two people, Jack and Jill. They both have a net worth of $5 million today.
Okay, they're equally wealthy.
But yesterday, Jack had $9 million and just lost $4 million in the stock market. And yesterday, Jill had $1 million and just won $4 million in the lottery. Today, their state of wealth is identical. According to Bernoulli, they should be equally happy, are they?
No way. Jack is devastated. He's contemplating jumping out a window. Jill is on top of the world. She's ecstatic.
Exactly, because humans do not experience life in states of wealth. We experience changes from a reference point.
And that insight is the cornerstone of prospect theory. This is the big idea that actually won the Nobel Prize.
This is it. Prospect theory introduces two revolutionary concepts. The first is the reference point, that all outcomes are evaluated as gains or losses relative to where you started. And the second, and arguably more powerful, is loss aversion.
The idea that losses loom larger than gains.
Much larger. The psychological pain of losing $100 is roughly twice as intense as the psychological pleasure of gaining $100.
Which you can test very easily. If I offer you a simple coin flip, heads, you win $150. Tails, you lose $100.
The expected value is positive. A rational econ would take that bet every time. But what does your gut say?
My gut says no thank you. The thought of losing that $100 just stings way too much. The potential gain of $150 doesn't feel good enough to outweigh it.
And most people refuse that bet. You generally need to offer a potential gain that is at least double the potential loss before a human will even consider taking a 50-50 risk.
So this explains why we're so often risk-averse. We play it safe to avoid the sharp pain of a loss.
But here is where it gets really, really interesting and systematically dangerous. Our attitude toward risk flips completely depending on where we are standing relative to the reference point.
What do you mean?
When you are in the domain of gains, when you're considering a choice between two positive outcomes, you are risk-averse. You'd rather take a sure gain of $900 than a 90% chance to win $1,000.
Right. You lock in the win. Don't get greedy.
Exactly. But when you are in the domain of losses, when you've already lost money and you're in the hole, you become risk-seeking.
Wait, risk-seeking? I thought we hate risk because we hate losing.
We hate realizing a loss. Accepting a loss is so painful that we will gamble to avoid it. Imagine you're at a poker table. You've already lost $900. You're deep in the domain of losses. You have two choices. Option A, you can walk away, accepting the sure loss of $900.
Oof, that feels terrible.
Or option B, you can take a final bet with a 90% chance you lose another $100 for a total loss of $1,000, but a 10% chance you win it all back and break even.
I take the bet. I have to try to get back to zero.
Most people do. Even though the sure loss is mathematically better, it is psychologically intolerable. We will risk a catastrophic loss for even a small chance to erase a sure loss.
This explains so much. It explains why a general might pour more troops into a failing war, the sunk cost fallacy.
We can't let the soldiers we've already lost die in vain. They're gambling to get back to the reference point of not having lost.
And it explains why traders on Wall Street hold on to their losing stocks for way too long, praying they'll bounce back. while they sell their winning stocks way too early to lock in that positive feeling of a gain.
It's a perfect recipe for buying high and selling low. It's System 1's emotional logic completely overriding System 2's financial logic.
Now, let's apply the same logic of framing and reference points to the world of politics and public policy, because framing seems to be the primary weapon of choice there.
The Asian disease problem is the definitive, mind-bending experiment on this. It shows, with terrifying clarity, how simply changing the words used to describe the same outcome can completely flip our moral and political preferences.
Let's walk through it.
Okay. Imagine the U.S. is preparing for the outbreak of an unusual Asian disease, which is expected to kill 600 people. You, as a policymaker, are presented with two alternative programs to combat the disease. In the first version, the options are framed in terms of lives saved. Program A, 200 people will be saved. Program B, there is a 13 probability that 600 people will be saved and a 23 probability that no people will be saved. Which do you choose?
I'd pick Program A. Save 200 people for sure. That's a guaranteed positive outcome. I don't want to gamble with people's lives.
And that's what the vast majority of people choose. They are risk averse because the frame is saving lives, which is a gain.
Makes sense.
Now, a different group of people is given the exact same scenario, but the options are framed in terms of lives lost. Program C, 400 people will die. Program D, there is a 13 probability that nobody will die and a 23 probability that 600 people will die.
Oof, wow. Okay, hearing 400 people will die as a sure thing sounds absolutely terrible, I think. I'd rather take the gamble in Program D. At least there's a chance nobody dies.
You just completely reversed your preference.
I did.
In the first case, framed as a gain saved, you were risk averse. In the second case, framed as a loss, die, you became risk seeking. But look at the math. 200 people will be saved is the exact same outcome as 400 people will die if the total is 600.
That is wild. My entire moral compass just spun 180 degrees simply because you changed a synonym.
And the implication of this is just staggering for a democracy. It suggests that our policy preferences are not reality-bound, they are frame-bound. If a political party can control the frame, if they can call it a death tax instead of an estate tax or enhanced interrogation instead of torture, they can control what the public chooses.
It suggests there is no underlying rational preference that's independent of how the choice is presented to us.
There isn't. The frame is the reality for System 1.
This brings us to a bigger systemic idea, the availability cascade. This feels like it explains the last 20 years of our political and media climate.
It's a powerful feedback loop. It starts with a relatively minor event or a statistically small risk, but the media latches onto it and amplifies it because it's dramatic and emotionally resonant. That's the availability part.
So it's easy to bring to mind.
It becomes incredibly available. This triggers a widespread public emotional reaction, fear, outrage. That public reaction creates immense pressure on the government to do something about the problem. So we get this huge allocation of resources and policy attention to a risk that might be, statistically speaking, trivial.
The classic example being terrorism versus, say, heart disease or climate change.
Exactly. Terrorism is a high-drama, low-probability event. It plays directly to System 1's love of villains, narratives, and vivid imagery. It has fire and explosions. Climate change, on the other hand, is a slow, abstract, statistical accumulation. It requires System 2 to even understand.
And System 2 is lazy.
So we end up spending trillions of dollars and sacrificing civil liberties to combat the flashy risk, while we struggle to get meaningful funding or political will to address the boring statistical killer that poses an existential threat.
So, okay, given that we are these flawed, biased humans and not these hyper-rational econs, what can we do? The system seems designed to exploit our weaknesses. Kahneman and his collaborator Richard Thaler came up with the idea of the nudge.
Right, and they call the philosophy libertarian paternalism, which sounds like a contradiction in terms, but the idea is simple. Since we know people are not perfectly rational, and we know System 2 is lazy, the people who design systems, what they call choice architects, have a responsibility to design those systems to help us make better choices.
Without taking away our freedom to choose.
That's the libertarian part. The classic example is organ donation.
The famous comparison between Austria and Germany?
It's a perfect natural experiment. They are culturally very similar neighboring countries. In Germany, to be an organ donor, you have to actively opt in. You have to get a form, check a box, and sign up. The donation rate is about 12%.
Which is very low.
Incredibly low. In Austria, the system is designed with an opt-out default. Everyone is automatically considered a donor unless they take the time to get a form and check a box saying they do not want to be one. Their donation rate is around 99%.
And it's not because Austrians are just fundamentally more altruistic people.
No.
Yeah.
It's because checking a box requires effort. It's a tiny bit of System 2 work. And because System 2 is lazy, most people in both countries just stick with the default. The path of least resistance determines the fate of thousands of people who need organs.
That is such a powerful and, frankly, hopeful example of how thoughtful systems design can lead to better outcomes. But isn't there a dark side to that? If you can nudge me to donate my organs, you can also nudge me to buy a warranty I don't need or vote for a candidate I shouldn't.
Absolutely. Choice architecture is a neutral tool, and it's a battleground. Companies use what are called dark patterns on websites to nudge you into subscriptions that are easy to start and nearly impossible to cancel. The system works both ways. The point is that there is no neutral design. A choice must be presented in some way, and that way will influence the outcome.
Now, I really want to explicitly connect all this back to our channel's core mission, this idea of a crisis in perception. Kahneman's work seems to be the bedrock of this idea because he emphasizes over and over that perception precedes belief.
It does. We have this intuitive model of ourselves as thinkers. I see the world objectively, I analyze the data, and then I form a belief.
Yeah.
Kahneman shows that the process is more like, my system 1 instantly and automatically constructs a coherent story, and then my system 2 gets hired as a lawyer to justify that story.
He uses those simple optical illusions to make the point, like the Muller-Lyer lines.
The two parallel lines with the arrows on the ends pointing in or out. One line looks distinctly longer than the other. You can take out a ruler and measure them and know, with your system 2, that they are the exact same length.
But you can't stop seeing one as longer.
You can't. The illusion persists. And that is his profound metaphor for cognitive bias. Knowing about the bias doesn't stop you from feeling the bias. I know all about the halo effect, but if I meet a handsome, confident, well-spoken person, my system 1 still instinctively generates a feeling of trust and competence.
The knowledge just gives you a chance to second-guess that feeling.
It gives you a split second, a chance for system 2 to wake up and say, hold on, don't trust that first impression, let's look for more data. But the initial perception, the illusion, is still there.
There's one last big concept from the end of the book that I think is crucial for understanding how we live our lives.
Yeah.
It's almost more philosophical than psychological, the idea of the two selves.
This is where Kahneman really stops being just a psychologist of judgment and becomes almost an existentialist. He makes this critical distinction between the experiencing self and the remembering self.
So what's the difference?
The experiencing self is the one that lives in the present moment. It's the part of you that answers the question, does it hurt right now? Am I enjoying this bite of food right now? It lives in a series of moments, each about 3 seconds long.
And the remembering self.
The remembering self is the storyteller. It's the one that keeps the score, that evaluates an entire experience after it's over, and most importantly, it's the one that makes decisions about the future.
And the key insight is that they don't agree. They value different things.
They are often in direct conflict. The remembering self is a terrible historian of your actual experience. It is subject to massive biases, primarily the peak end rule.
The peak end rule.
The remembering self doesn't average your experience. It judges an entire episode of your life. A vacation, a medical procedure, a relationship, almost entirely on 2 single data points. Its most intense moment, the peak, whether good or bad, and how it ended. It completely ignores the duration of the experience.
The cold water experiment illustrates this perfectly, and honestly, it might be the most disturbing study in the entire book for me.
It is deeply counterintuitive and unsettling. So participants are asked to put their hand in painfully cold water, about 14 degrees Celsius, for a full 60 seconds. That's condition A. It's unpleasant.
Okay.
In condition B, they do the exact same 60 seconds in that painfully cold water, plus an extra 30 seconds where the water is secretly warmed up, just slightly, to 15 degrees. It's still painful, but it's slightly less painful than before.
So condition B is objectively, unequivocally worse. It contains all the same pain as A, plus an additional 30 seconds of more pain.
A rational experiencing self would hate condition B more. But after they've done both trials, the researcher asks them a simple question. For the third trial, you get to choose which of the first 2 experiences you repeat.
And they choose the longer one. They choose to endure more pain.
A large majority chooses to repeat condition B. Because the ending was slightly less painful. The memory of the 90-second trial was, it hurt, but then it got a little better at the end. The memory of the 60-second trial was just, it hurt the whole time and then stopped. The remembering self, the storyteller, tricked the experiencing self into volunteering for more total suffering, simply because it made for a better story arc.
That is, that is a profound insight into human nature. We design our entire lives to please the remembering self, often at the direct expense of our experiencing self.
We go on stressful, exhausting vacations that are not fun in the moment, just so we can have good photos and a story to tell later. We are, in a very real sense, tyrants to our experiencing selves. We sacrifice the now for the story we'll tell about it later.
So, after all of this, what does it all mean? I'll try to wrap this up. If we take a step back, what is the big takeaway? We've dismantled the rational agent. We've shown that our intuition is riddled with predictable bugs. We've shown that we can be manipulated by simple changes in wording. It feels a little bleak.
I think it forces a kind of intellectual humility upon us. The main takeaway is that rationality is not our brain's default setting. It is a high-energy, resource-intensive state that is rarely sustained for long. We are not machines for logic. We are machines for jumping to conclusions, designed for survival and coherence, not for statistics and probability theory.
It fundamentally challenges what Kahneman calls the illusion of understanding.
Completely. We are masters of hindsight. We look at the past and construct these neat causal stories that make it all seem predictable and inevitable. And this gives us the dangerous illusion that the future is also predictable. It is not. We tell ourselves stories of flawed heroes and inevitable disasters because our System 1 craves cause and effect. We systematically ignore the massive and undeniable role of luck and chance in everything.
So, what is the final provocation for the listener to take away from this deep dive?
I think it's this. Modern systems, financial markets, political campaigns, social media platforms are increasingly being designed, either intentionally or by accident, to exploit these very cognitive errors. They are built to feed the availability beast with sensationalism. They are designed to trigger our loss aversion to keep us engaged. They frame choices in ways that hack our System 1.
So true skepticism has to be turned inward.
That's it exactly. True skepticism isn't just doubting the facts somebody else presents to you. It's about doubting your own sense of confidence. It's about recognizing that the calm voice of reason you hear in your own head, the voice of your System 2, is often just a very clever lawyer who has been hired on retainer by your intuition to justify what you already feel.
That is a heavy, but I think a very necessary realization. We have to give credit where it is due. This entire framework is the product of the brilliant and legendary collaboration of Daniel Kahneman and the late Amos Tversky.
It is a Nobel Prize-winning body of work for a reason. And frankly, for anyone whose interest we've piqued today, reading the book Thinking Fast and Slow is absolutely worth it, just for the sheer richness and elegance of the dozens of experiments we couldn't even get to.
Absolutely. Go read the source material or borrow it from a library. This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.